The festival of the Bona Dea, which meant good goddess, was dedicated to what is thought to be an aspect of many Greek goddesses, from Cybele to Demeter, combined. Her true name, however, could be known only to women. Like the cult of Hercules Invictus, the male-only cult over which Sulla was forced to divorce Dalmatica, the festival of the Bona Dea was a female-only cult. Because the cult belonged only to the women of Rome, and all the writing on the subject of the Bona Dea comes to us from men, whose absolute knowledge of the rites was speculative, we know very little about what actually took place at these gatherings. The Bona Dea was a goddess associated with both chastity and fertility in women, but appears also to have induced healing. She was associated with the protection of the state. Twice each year a festival was held in her honor. One festival was held within her temple on Aventine Hill, which was open to the women of the public. The second festival was held by the wives of the senior magistrates, and was limited to the more exclusive women of the upper nobility. Whether celebrated in her temple, or in someone's home, the rites of the Bona Dea were always observed by the Vestal virgins. At these festivals, women were permitted to drink unwatered wine, a luxury denied them in Roman polite society. Musicians and poets, all female, were hired, and decorations, specific to the goddess, were erected throughout the venue for the festivities. However, under threat of Rome's utter destruction, for whom she was protectress, no man was permitted access to the feminine mysteries of the Bona Dea. Publius Claudius Pulcher, who had been the cause of the mutiny against Lucullus, and who had extorted money and forged bribes in Gaul, returned to Rome just in time to help secure the election of Lucius Licinius Murena, through his devious influence on Lucullus's soldiers. Because of the shady nature of his business dealings, Publius Claudius gathered to himself a group of ruffians who, under his leadership, became a type of gang, running various extortions and petty crimes throughout Rome. Publius Claudius Pulcher was quickly becoming king of the streets. At about this same time, Publius Claudius married an extremely wealthy heiress named Fulvia. Fulvia was the daughter of Marcus Fulvius Flaccus Bambalio, the son of a staunch ally of Gaius Gracchus during the latter's battle against the Senate. Fulvia's mother was Sempronia Tuditanni, another noblewoman of the same Sempronius family that produced Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. There is a second school of thought which names Fulvia the granddaughter of Gaius Gracchus. However, the length of time between the death of Gracchus and the birth of Fulvia makes this claim suspect. Cicero tells us, on her mother's side, that Fulvia was the granddaughter of Sempronius Tuditanus, a relative of the brothers Gracchi. As heiress to both the Sempronius and Fulvius fortunes, a woman of some extreme value, Fulvia was likely just as impetuous a person as Publius Claudius. The two of them were perfect for each other. Publius Claudius had lived next door to Cicero prior to marrying Fulvia. When Cicero learned of threats on his life, he turned to his former neighbor, Publius Claudius, for protection. Claudius formed a group of bodyguards, made up of his street friends, who stormed into the Senate house and drew their swords on Rome's brawling senators. Following the Catilina conspiracy, and the near-violent struggle over whether or not to recall Pompeius Magnus from the east, and give him control of the city, Aurelia Cotta, mother to the newly elected Pontifex Maximus, acquired the distinction of hosting the festival of the Bona Dea. The festivities were scheduled to be held inside Caesar's home, the Regia. The Vestal virgins, whose house, the Temple of Vesta, made up a portion of the Regia, were in attendance to officiate the homilies. Caesar's wife, Pompeia, as well as many prominent women in Rome's upper society, also participated. It was at this time that Publius Claudius, in one of his usual attempts at notoriety, and likely aided by his wife, Fulvia, decided he was going to be the first man to witness the mysteries of the Bona Dea. We are told that Publius Claudius, dressing in a woman's clothing, and pretending to be a musician, covered his face with a veil, and slipped, unnoticed, into the festival alongside the other female musicians. We are also told by some that Publius Claudius did all this in the hopes of discrediting Caesar through the seduction of his wife, Pompeia, with whom Fulvia was likely friends. Unfortunately, Publius Claudius was quickly discovered within the Regia. The moment he was unmasked, Aurelia Cotta, as hostess of the festival, would have rushed to cover all of the Bona Dea's icons. But it was too late. A man had violated the sacred mysteries of the feminine. The damage was done. The blasphemy of finding a man's entering within the mysteries of the Bona Dea was a scandal that reached magnificent proportions. Not only was it the obsession of the upper classes, but to Rome's religious, the desecration of the Bona Dea by Publius Claudius Pulcher was a sacrilege of the highest order. Strictly observant families who gave birth during the year of the sacrilege abandoned their newborn children to the streets surrounding Rome's many temples, in the hopes their sacrifice would appease the good goddess, and turn her wrath away from Rome. And while a good share of these exposed infants would likely have been rescued by less religious, childless families, some still died of exposure and starvation. Publius Claudius was immediately indicted for the abomination, and what followed turned out to be the trial of the century. Lucius Licinius Lucullus, who had his own personal axe to grind with Publius Claudius, came out of retirement in order to help prosecute the case against his former brother-in-law, adding the charge of incest with his sister, Claudia Quinta, who had been Lucullus's former wife. Lucullus even produced several slaves, who testified under oath that they had witnessed Publius Claudius and Claudia Quinta in flagranti delicto. However, because the slaves belonged to the household of Lucullus, their testimony was deemed suspect. But, though Caesar's mother, Aurelia Cotta, and one of his sisters, Julia, both testified to the offense of Publius Claudius during the mysteries of the Bona Dea, Caesar, himself, even in his capacity as Pontifex Maximus, did not testify against Publius Claudius. Caesar did, however, divorce Pompeia over the scandal. When asked why, having nothing to testify against Publius Claudius, Caesar had divorced Pompeia, who had no knowledge of Publius Claudius's intent, Caesar produced the now famous quote, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." Because Publius Claudius was a gang leader with a rather large contingent of thugs who followed him everywhere, and who were not above employing violence, many were afraid to testify against him, making Publius Claudius feel safe in perjuring himself on the stand by claiming that it wasn't him, that he wasn't even in Rome on the day of the festival of the Bona Dea. Regrettably, Cicero knew it was a lie. Publius Claudius had paid him a visit the very afternoon of the scandal. And yet, Cicero hesitated to testify against a man who controlled such a gang of thugs, especially while others, including the Pontifex Maximus, had remained quiet. In the end, Cicero's wife Terentia forced him to testify against Publius Claudius. She did this for the simple reason that, when Lucullus first divorced Claudia Quinta, she had quickly come nosing around Cicero in the hopes that she might entice him to divorce Terentia, and marry her instead. This made Terentia angry with the entire Claudius Pulcher family. Understandably, Cicero's testimony against Publius Claudius was viewed by the gang leader as a personal betrayal. Cicero now joined Lucius Licinius Lucullus and Ptolemy, king of Cyprus, on the list of those whom Publius Claudius would one day seek revenge. However, even with Cicero's testimony, and the testimony of Caesar's sister and mother, who had unmasked him during the festivities, Publius Claudius was acquitted. If the trial of Publius Claudius was the trial of the century, then the ruling was even more scandalous than the crime itself. But, too many people benefited from hefty bribes paid out by prominent reformers who, seeing the strength of Claudius's street army, thought to use Publius Claudius to further their own political agendas. Additionally, the judges were hesitant to convict a man who was, not only a gang leader, capable of violent revenge, but also a man who didn't give a second thought to offending the gods. Publius Claudius Pulcher was free. And though he sought no retribution against those who had prosecuted him, Publius Claudius was personally affronted by the testimony of Cicero, as well as by the non-action of Pompeius Magnus. Because in his youth, Publius Claudius had trained for the law courts under the tutelage of Cicero, who considered him a very gifted and persuasive speaker, Publius Claudius considered Cicero a friend. And Pompeius Magnus, the general on whose behalf Publius Claudius had instigated mutiny within Lucullus's legions, earned his ire because he had offered not a single word of support during the trial. For their betrayals, Publius Claudius began working on ways in which he might make them pay.